The band started officially in 1991, but we started messing around a little earlier than that. Anders and I had become friends. We didn't go to the same school, but we had mutual friends and we were from the same southern Stockholm suburbs. Back in the late 80s, hip-hop music had made it big in Sweden, and this movement was surrounding us, our friends, and saturated the whole lifestyle of being young in Stockholm at the time. While both Anders and I were part of some shady activities connected to this, we were however quite different, as we both listened to metal music, and I guess that's where the thought of having a band of our own came in. We spent most of our time begging for money from our parents so we could go downtown to either the Heavy Sound, House of Kicks, Far Out or Mega Rock record stores. We bought as much as we could afford. In the beginning it was mostly thrash or even some heavy metal that we had missed out on years earlier, but death metal was coming strong and it was a style that attracted us deeply. I would buy any album that had the tag death metal on it, and I would most certainly worship it even if it was shit really. The music and concept made such a big impact on me. Later on I would be able to tell hit from shit luckily, and some favorite bands started to become very important for me, like Morbid Angel, Entombed, Carnage, Autopsy and Paradise Lost, with the latter climbing up to godlike status when they released their second album Gothic in 1990. And that's when Anders and I stopped playing guitar through his 20-watt Gorilla amp and playing drums on empty cans in his boy room. I had a friend called Philip in my school who was also into death metal, and even better, he had written Satan's Kid instead of his name on a school ID, and he had a bass guitar. I had a plan going, so I hooked up him and Anders for a meeting outside a subway station one night, and right there we decided that we had a band. Philip had connections, so he could get us a rehearsal place at the local youth club. I borrowed a drum kit from a friend, and all of a sudden we could tell our other friends that we couldn't join them for whatever boarding parties on Friday evening. Sorry, we had to rehearse with our band. We tried numerous people for the second guitar slot, but never really found one we were content with, so the band remained me, Anders and Philip for some time. We called ourselves Decomposed, and I remember feeling satisfied when someone that worked at the youth club fearfully said, "But it means rotten," when he saw our name on the list of bands rehearsing there. We tried to play all kinds of different styles connected to death metal at once. We had chaotic grind parts going into sloppy doom parts and anything in between. However, the love for slower stuff, plus it was easier to play, like Paradise Lost and Candlemass, made us go for that style, mixed up with some contemporary semi-fast stuff like Entombed and Dismember. We had a number of songs that we kept playing but never really got anywhere, and the harder I think about it, the less I remember. I can't recall the reason why Philip wasn't in the band anymore and why we changed rehearsal place.
Our first rehearsal place was to be found in Fruängen, Stockholm, at a dorky youth club with a cool name, Gate 7, that fit our purposes during the 4 hours every Friday evening we had to ourselves. We had one song written, which we played over and over at every rehearsal. I'm not sure we even heard each other, or even were interested in listening much to each other. I guess mainly everyone was just blown away by the sounds coming out of their own instruments in some kind of patterned noise created together. Just looking at the drum kit and realizing they were no longer cookie/ice cream cans, or that the amp provided by the youth club was a Marshall GCM 800, replacing then my tiny 20-watt Gorilla amp that had no distortion, was simply amazing. I remember the Gorilla amp had a sticker on the front panel that read, "It will knock your socks off." Well, maybe it did, back in 1959. Another funny thing is that I hadn't yet figured out how you played muted chords. I didn't realize you used the palm of your right hand, so I randomly found a dead spot on the end of the low E string that sounded fairly like it, and went to that spot back and forth every time a muted tone needed to be played in every riff. I still laugh about this to this day. I can't remember for how long we were dwelling at this place, but I don't think we ever stopped playing that one and the same song. Our bass player, Philip, who would also sometimes bring a guitar instead of a bass depending on his mood, had a way more punk attitude in him and many more hardcore influences than we did. Actually, we had none of that. I remember when discussing the making of our future demo one day, he said it would be cool to record the sound of a flushing toilet in a break between two brutal parts, and I guess that's where the timer started ticking for his final countdown in the lineup. Many years later, there were some news articles about the 90s most dangerous Nazi instigators, and we were shocked to see his name and picture show up among those listed. To each his own. We were fooling around with some other band names before we settled for Katatonia. Some definitely crappier than the other. I remember brief trial periods for names such as Decomposed, Entity and Melancholia. But we couldn't settle for one. Then one day we recognized the word Katatonia appeared in other bands' lyrics and song titles. We liked how it sounded, and when we found out it's a form of schizophrenia, we were all totally intrigued by its definition. It suited our vision perfectly, a state of mind where the journey would escape inwards and further away from the outside. To put a more Scandinavian flavor to it, we exchanged the C for a K, and I drew that pentagram-tinged logo to mark the true birth of Katatonia. The rest of 1990 was all about supporting the scene. We would be going to all local gigs, but also travel to other cities to catch any tour that wouldn't come through Stockholm. We did a tremendous amount of tape trading and writing letters. Anybody remembers Return My Stamps? We were trying to get hold of any cool demos, promos, available only on cassette and vinyl at this point in time, and also as many international fanzines as possible. There was no return. The whole underground movement had become our lifestyle. Growing your hair longer and wearing nothing but band shirts, the more obscure the better, together with a flannel worker shirt or an MC leather jacket was the unspoken dress code. Metalheads, that's what they called us.
The next step for us would be to record a demo tape. Now it was just Anders and I. We had another rehearsal room downtown, and I recall us writing some parts for the Jehovah and Meth demo right there. One song that we were super happy with never made it to the demo though. It was called Bearer of Light, Lucifer as you know, and it was quite a fast affair. We thought it sounded like thrash gone black metal. We got in touch with Don Swanner, known from Edge of Sanity, who also ran his own 8-track studio Gory Sound. To be able to rehearse more than just once a week, we brought my shitty drums and Anders' little 20-watt Gorilla amp to my parents' summer house where we could finish the demo songs in an old barn. We played like crazy for a couple of weeks and finally had 3 songs ready. Soon it was time to hit the studio.
When Jonas and I started over on our own, or started for real, we spent most of our days lurking around the floors of this building downtown owned by a cultural circle called Studiefrämjandet. It was a place where bands that didn't own any gear, like ourselves, could share rehearsal rooms already equipped with provided backline. If there were any vacant rooms, or some band being late to any of the rooms, we sneaked in at first chance. The downside of this rehearsal complex was the schedule allocated to each band. You were only given a 3-hour practice pass one time per week. A ridiculously small portion for 2 hungry teenagers happily skipping school and replacing studies with a jam. We would sometimes lock the door from the inside and play so loud pretending we didn't hear the next band come knocking, and we acted like we had forgotten the time. The bass player in the band after us turned out to be a cop, but not even that would stop us. Eventually they installed a decibel detector in our room, which would cut off all electricity, so the room went both silent and pitch black at the same time. I remember one of us then found out you could open up one of the roof panels, so we placed the detector up inside the isolation padding. We later found out one of the employees had got burn wounds after having tried to take down an apparently very overheated detector. Oops. I remember every minute of being there was magic. It was exciting and always fun. Jonas would be behind the kit, who actually most of the time had to put 2 single kicks together onto 1 bass drums with his legs and put the snare on the side just to be able to play the oh so important double bass drums. And I would be standing in front with my old Gibson clone guitar that I spray painted into a new color every week. We did everything we could do to be there. All we wanted to do was to jam and write songs. And despite being only a duo, we evolved fast. The material for our first demo was completed, and we had song titles and lyrics done. But what about a title for the demo? An old issue of the Swedish comic magazine Fantomen, The Phantom, was laying around and had this article of an old legend from the Middle Ages about this creature golem that was brought back to life by inscribing the words Jehovah Elohim Emeth, God is truth, on the golem's forehead. It is said that the golem then took a knife, scraped off the initial aleph of the last word, thus obtaining Jehovah Elohim Meth, God is dead. Perfect. A statement like that was exactly what we were after, and I guess we forgot the spelling and just wrote down what we could remember, thus Jehovah Elohim Meth.
We took a train to Finspång and jumped onto a bus. Dan met us at the bus stop and started talking like crazy. He was extremely funny with a lovely accent. I felt at home immediately in the company of Dan and in the small studio where we set up our gear. I had borrowed a bass from a dude at my high school that played with Exhumed and Morpheus, if I recall correctly. Anders was supposed to play the bass, and when it was time to record, I think it was the first time he ever actually had a bass guitar in his lap. I was playing on the drum kit that belonged to the studio, and since my own drums back home were more like toy drums, I felt really nervous about this huge pro-looking kit. I ran into trouble with the fast parts, and after some talk we decided to take Dan's advice to skip the fast drumming. I played slow rhythms all along instead, and I believe that this is where Katatonia really got started. Back home I couldn't really believe that what I heard on the tape was us. I thought it sounded so good, not just the sound but also the songs. They became better without the fast part, and I really felt that we had something going. We printed 100 blue cassettes and made a full color cover thanks to my aunt's husband, who was working at an advertising agency. We made flyers that we sent out to our contacts in the underground and started to sell or trade the demo at death metal gigs in Stockholm. One thing that sticks in my mind even to this day is when Anders and me went to a show with Unanimated, and a dude comes up to us saying, "Katatonia, I bought the demo from you at that other gig and it's so damn good." It was the first ever response we had from someone we didn't know, and it was a wonderful feeling.
The cover artwork on the demo was a slow shutter speed full color photo Jonas took of me with the moon behind my head, so the light glowed and beamed like a Gloria. It looked really unearthly and mysterious with its deep blue tone. We chose blue cassettes to match the cover. Hell, I even wore blue eyeliner for the corpse paint inside the booklet that also exclusively featured my mom's latest coat and my one-row pyramid stud belt, grim and true. Needless to say, only about 20 copies went out with the member photos until we severed them off the rest of the inserts. If you formed a band back then and wanted to make yourself a name, it was important to be vocal about where you belonged, what country/city, and to define your style. Genres and labels were damn important, as albums were categorized into different bins if they belonged to heavy, thrash, doom, death or black metal, and so on. On the first flyers for the demo, I put down the words gothic black metal, foremost to distance ourselves from the extremely hyped death metal boom that was everywhere. but also because we always carried black metal influences that we wanted to mix up with doom and death metal. Our image and visual aesthetics always leaned towards black metal, which the early photos shows, but we were musically more refined and maybe less evil, maybe less raw than black metal is generally known for. I guess after all, we were a little bit of everything thrown in a mid-pace blender. We felt musically close to bands such as Paradise Lost, Bathory and Tiamat. In every review the words dark and melodic were mentioned. Those two words have stood the test of time and still make up the essence of the band today when you combine them together.
The demo had been reprinted a couple of times with red and transparent cassettes, so it had reached 500 copies sold and sent out, an amazing amount. We started answering interviews and fanzines and it felt like the ball was rolling. After a gig that we went to in Uppsala, I think it was with Immolation and Massacre, we started talking to this guy that we knew briefly who had heard our demo. He was a bass player and he said he really loved our style. We thought he seemed to have the right approach, so we finally had a new bass player, Guillaume Luche. Started writing new songs with him. Sometimes we went to graveyards at night to find the right atmosphere for what we were doing. Great times. Got a few record deal offers from small underground labels, which felt nice. We decided to go with the Swedish label No Fashion Records. They had released the first Marduk and also signed Dissection and Unanimated, so it felt like a great label to be on. The new songs we made were more doom metal and less black metal as on the demo, thanks to the great inspiration from Bathory. We listened to Paradise Lost all the time, but we had also explored a band that was about to become very important for the three of us, Fields of the Nephilim. Their guitar work with a lot of delay was blowing our minds. We also got a first gig offer, which was taking place the very day before we were going back to Gore Sound to record our debut album. We needed a second guitar player to do the gig, and Guillaume knew a guy who had potential. He rehearsed with us a couple of times, and I think he thought our songs were simple and boring. He was the shredder type. But he agreed on doing the gig with us. When he came to the venue, I was already disgustingly nervous. Edge of Sanity was supposed to headline, but they couldn't come, so Hypocrisy were there instead. Also Austrian band Disharmonic Orchestra played, plus a bunch of local bands with us as openers. We had decided to play the Jehovah Elohim Meth demo through 3 songs and then walk off. Anders was going to sing, as I was unsure of if I could sing and play drums at the same time. At soundcheck we realized he had a very short cable for his guitar, so he couldn't be in the middle of the stage. He was forced to stand pretty much right by his amp. Just before the show, our session guitarist said he was going to do something on stage, a stage show. We had no idea what was going to happen. All of this, plus the gig itself, made me so nervous I had serious plans of escaping the venue and taking the train home. Luckily I was convinced to stick around, but what a gig. The first thing that happens after my 1, 2, 3, 4 count is that Guillaume bangs his head right into the head of Anders' guitar, falls back and onto the floor. He has to perform sitting for a while. Our session guitarist pulls up a guy from the audience. The guy is dressed up as a priest. The session guy brings out a knife and cuts the throat of the priest. The priest is spitting blood all over the front row. Looking back on this, I think it was a great thing to do at the first ever gig. But sitting there trying to play the drums with no idea what was going to happen. But of course having to watch it, well, it was kind of distracting. A little traumatized, the 3 of us board the train to Finspång the day after. We are, however, very proud that we made it and very fueled up for all the new songs that we were going to record. Hooking up with Dan again is great. He's got big plans for the album as well. The recording is going really well. Dan finds a big knife in Guillaume's bass case one day. We didn't know it was there, we found it funny, but Dan thought it was scary. I think we recorded for 5 days and mixed in one day. Bass, drums and 1 guitar were recorded live. Second guitar, vocals and keyboards were done afterwards. The weird, unfat guitar sound came from Anders connecting the distortion pedal and the delay pedal in the wrong order. But the unique tone shines through and I actually like it now. Dance of December Soul was born. Born but not delivered. I think we had to wait more than a year to have it released, which was a grim long time for some 18-year-olds who had just climbed step 1 on their ladder to stardom and world domination.
When we signed with No Fashion Records for one album, the contract was just composed of a couple of lines that didn't even reach down half an A4 paper sheet. But the pride of knowing we were signed and were gonna record a debut album that would soon to be found physically in stores around the world was such a rewarding feeling that not 100 A4 pages could fill. Compact discs, or simply CD, had made its major debut on the market and was quickly becoming increasingly popular as the media of choice. The cassette media, or MC as it was called, was dead by now. But the LP, the vinyl, was still being sold. You could see the shops lumping the genres together, whereas in the past it was all tagged and divided across every subgenre. This milestone is still one of my proudest moments and maybe the biggest goal I ever had. Back then, the nature of the record industry and the media industry was so immensely different from what it is today. It was really hard to get signed, and many bands didn't pass their demo days. But if they did release an album and entered the market, you could make one thing damn certain. Kids would pick it up almost only for the cover artwork, or the logo, or the band name, or even which label it was on. And most of us would play it to death. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we got to experience some of the ugly and filthy backyards of the music biz already this early in our career. As Thomas Nyqvist, the owner of No Fashion Records, quickly lost control over his label. Just before it all went down the drain, he sold his whole creation behind our backs to the Swedish distribution company House of Kicks. This resulted not only in the release of the album being postponed for what seemed like an eternity, but now we were also told we were signed under a new deal, with their figures under their conditions, a contract that didn't even have our signatures on it. The only right thing at that time would have been for Mr. Nyqvist to file for bankruptcy and to return the album masters to their faithful and respective owners. But we all got ran over like rats and became floundering victims caught in the slime. We ended up filing a lawsuit, a tedious process that should have been brought justice to the table once and for all, but resulted in nothing good. House of Kicks couldn't be touched, and Nyqvist, who was convicted guilty of several wrongdoings and owing us masters and money, was declared personally bankrupt and put on a so-called existential minimum. All we ever wanted was to sign a deal, record and release our album under the relevant terms, and then look for world domination. Eventually the album got released, and we had to swallow the deception to move on. We couldn't let this moment we had waited our entire lives for to be ruined. But we refused to have any contact with the people who released the album because they were no record company. No Fashion 2.0 was nothing but a pressing plant in disguise, distributing albums for profit, and they quickly learned that Dance of December Souls was a success. It sold really well from the get-go and was critically acclaimed, so they did their best in trying to persuade us to re-sign with them. We were dreaming youngsters, but we weren't arch-idiots.
We had a few gigs in Sweden promoting Dance of December Souls. Not much, but enough to keep us going. Umeå, Karlstad, where we slept outside at the bus station. Norrköping, where we slept 4 people on 1 mattress. Stockholm, perhaps a few more. The album got a lot of praise in the press, including a raving review in one of the daily newspapers. Perfect thing to show our parents, letting them see that all the years of hard work finally paid off, kind of. All of a sudden we got tired of the metal sound and decided to go full-on goth. Not as in goth metal though. We had been listening a lot to Fields of Nephilim and Sisters of Mercy, etc., and wanted to explore their dark sound. Maybe the problem was that we were too young and had not been taking enough amphetamine in Leeds to actually get the true downtrodden spirit of a goth rocker. We tried though, and it resulted in one song called Scarlet Heavens, which was later going to be released on a split 10-inch with the Irish band Primordial. We signed to the Italian label Avant-Garde Music, recruited Fredrik Norman from Swedish Deathmongers Uncanny on second guitar, and decided to reactivate the sound of Dance of December Souls. The plan was to record an EP to see how the new label was working. Went down to Unisound and recorded and mixed the whole thing in one day. We had intended to record For Funerals to Come at the infamous Sunlight studio, but our visit got cancelled last minute. I had itched to play on Sunlight's D-Drums digital drum kit, and I was really bummed out that I wouldn't be able to. But I asked Dan if he had something similar in his studio, and he did. That's why the drums sound so strange and bad on that release. I take full responsibility. Neither Dan nor the other guys wanted me to play on those digital drums, but for me it was a dream coming true. The EP is alright, it's only got 2 real songs on it, with the first one, Funeral Wedding, is most resembling the Katatonia from the Dance of December Souls album. We returned to Dan and Unisound later on same year to record a couple of songs for a compilation CD that was going to be released by a Swedish label called Wrong Again Records. We wrote the song exclusively for this recording, and I think both Black Erotica and Love of the Swan were perfect for the current Katatonia sound. After the release of the For Funerals to Come EP, we were supposed to go on our first tour, a European run with Avant-Garde Music label mates Unholy. But somehow this tour never happened. I can't remember the reasons. This led to some sort of stagnation within Katatonia, as Anders had also started to expand his interest in black metal and started up the solo project Diabolical Masquerade, while me and Fredrik were fooling around with riffs that would eventually be the side project known as October Tide. Anders and I drifted apart for a while. Things like that happen. I think we really would have wanted to do that tour, to see Katatonia move forward instead of going nowhere. Plus, we had been hanging out on more or less a daily basis for 5-6 years.
We still struggled with the dilemma of an incomplete lineup and not being able to find that last 4th member, so Mikael Åkerfeldt from Opeth stepped in and played a second guitar for the few gigs we had around Sweden. Opeth hadn't released their debut album yet, so they were virtually unknown, and Mike had lots of times on his hands and eager to be part of the metal community. He told me some years later that during this time the thought of permanently joining Katatonia had crossed his mind, but that his belief in Opeth was strong and he really wanted to pursue his goals. He didn't mistake himself. Indeed, Opeth went on to become one of Sweden's biggest metal bands of all time. We had now swapped our old rehearsal room for another one in Sundbyberg, Stockholm, that was still under the wings of Studio Främjandet, but in this building the rooms were shared by only 3 bands each, and you could split the rehearsal hours way more generously. Having almost overdosed on our new influences in goth music and listening only to Fields of the Nephilim, Sisters of Mercy, Mission and The Cure, we decided to abandon our metal sound and go for some experimental and ambitious goth. We tried really hard to make the material write itself, but we only came up with an 11-minute song. I think we were very confused about our identity at this point, and consequently this detour was short-lived. The song made it to tape over a cold day in February at Unisound, but the freezing weather also froze that song right there. The rehearsals got less frequent, and still not having any of our own gear forced us parasites to borrow the other band stuff, and we always changed the settings and left them like that. We asked for it, and soon we got a note that said, "Kåta Tanja, don't fucking touch our stuff anymore," much to the right reasons. That ended our era of having a rehearsal place for many years. I also remember we played a gig together with At the Gates around this time, right across the street from the rehearsal place. And there was a new black metal band in town calling themselves Dark Funeral. They'd been on TV and seemed to act like a scene militia, So apparently they arrived at the location on duty, then only to question, quote, the Christian faggots in Katatonia, as our bass player wore a Christian cross around his neck while we had a pentagram in our logo. I remember Guillaume's answer very well, because it's a symbol of death. Frederick Norman entered the picture at the end of the year and finally filled the shoes of that long-wanted second guitar player. But his time in the band was only to last one round, before Katatonia went down for the count. By now Jonas and I had moved on, to go our separate ways without discussing or deciding the fate of Katatonia. We more or less ended up on non-talking terms after some drama with the girl, but nonetheless also as a result of suffering the disillusion of our first ever tour getting completely cancelled, which also involved another sacrifice. We had all bailed for good from our schools, so there was nothing to return to. The year before, I'd been kicked out of my boy room and I was floating around living between my girlfriend's place and my dad's place in Tumba, outside Stockholm. I guess we also saw signs of our individual musical approaches heading in different directions. 1995 became my all-in black metal year as I put all my dedication into Diabolical Masquerade and Bewitched and recorded 2 albums with each project. While Jonas and Frederick, his new brother-in-arms, kept the catatonic vibes going in their brand new October Tide project. Throughout the remainder of 1995, I was still doing press for the For Funerals to Come EP that was released earlier in the year, and the more interviews I did, and the more people around the world I got to talk to, I realized Katatonia was not meant to be over yet. There was more to give. I decided to quit my day job that had been sucking my energy dry for the last 6 months and started preparing a second album under the title Where Hearses Go. I had this perfect vision in my head for how it was going to sound, a mix somewhere between The Cure, Fields of the Nephilim and Chris Isaak. In other words, another attempt at pursuing a non-metal path like we tried the year before, but this time maybe a bit less goth. I was so determined to make this happen that I even booked studio time at Unisound without even having talked to any of the old members. Arrogant and full of ambition, I didn't even consider getting turned down.
I got a phone call from Anders asking whether I wanted to be part of a new Katatonia album or not. I think he had been in touch with Guillaume, who wasn't really interested anymore since he had started to explore the world of hard synth and industrial music. Anders told me he had already booked the Unisound studio quite soon too. I asked if he had any songs and he told me he had a few, but they were more in the vein of the Scarlet Heavens track that we did, perhaps with a little more Chris Isaak thrown in. I really wanted to get back to Katatonia, but I didn't want to play goth. I wanted Katatonia to keep progressing, do something unexpected, maybe even regressing. We hooked up and started jamming on a couple of new ideas. I think we did the first riff to the song Brave and something more. We talked to Fredrik as well and he was good to go. For some weird, stupid reason we didn't write more music prior to entering the studio, and the whole session was to become a nightmare. A creative nightmare, I must add. We never told Dan that we didn't have any songs. After having set up the gear the first day in the studio, done a bit of sound checking for the drums, Dan went home, and we realized we had to write at least one song during the night so we could start the recording the next day. I think we started with Rain Room from scratch. We were up all night just pounding out riffs and ideas for arrangements, and we loved what we were doing. The style was very different from what we had been about so far. Much more simplistic, extreme, monotonous, dark and huge. Perfect, until Dan came around in the morning, happily unknowing of the obscure music that was waiting to be unleashed upon him. Dan is a super musical guy, and he hates when music is boring, wrong in a musical way, or just plain stupid. Apparently what we were doing was all that and a little more. He was expecting a Dance of December Souls Part 2 3 years later, with a band that hopefully had become better musicians. He had a lot of new gadgets in the studio just waiting to be used to make our new album a harmonic, melodic symphony of doom goth metal. And we did not deliver. I had weird requests for the drum sound. We used the Boss HM2, the classic death metal distortion that Entomb, Dismember, Carnage, etc. used for the guitars. We kept doing one new song each night to have something to record in the morning. The music that came out was made of grinding riffs that went on for ages, unhappening, depressive. But we stood up for what we were doing. We had a few fights, but Dan finally let us have our way. I was forced to leave the vocal duties to our good friend Mikael Åkerfeldt from Opeth, as I had lost the technique, but it only added to the experience. Brave Murder Day was born, Katatonia was reborn. And finally we were able to leave Sweden for our first tour. We hooked up with the Norwegian Weirdos in the Woods and a band from South Africa called Voice of Destruction. For some reason I wanted to do only vocals on the tour, which is weird because I couldn't even sing on our new album. So we brought in Fredrik's old companion from Uncanny, Kenneth Englund, to play drums on the tour. The lineup was completed with Mikael Åkerfeldt on bass. The tour itself was quite good from what I can remember. Fair amounts of people coming out and an overall good vibe between the bands. The big problem for us was that Brave Murder Day had not been released yet when the tour started. So I think for the first half of the tour we played songs that no one had ever heard before. And on the second half of the tour, we played to people that had heard the songs once before. The tour was in November and the bus we had wasn't very good. The heater didn't work. We slept with jackets, shoes and hats to keep warm, and drank a lot of alcohol, of course. After a while I got really sick. I had a fever and I had lost my voice and I couldn't even talk. Screaming my lungs out was not an option. I realized that I wouldn't heal up on the bus from hell, so I decided to go home. I made sure Anders got the lyrics, the other guys managed to borrow someone's rehearsal place, and Anders had to learn how to play the new songs on guitar and sing at the same time in one day. I think it worked out. I got on a train in Frankfurt, and some 2 days later I was back in Stockholm. Still sick, but feeling even worse for leaving my friends, and even worse for not being able to be part of the adventure that we had been dreaming about since we started the band. Brave Murder Day got butchered in the press in the beginning, but it seemed to grow steadily on people and is today rated as one of our best albums by many fans.
When the months caught up with me and started breathing down my neck, I finally decided it was time to revive the last lineup and get in touch with the others to convince them to come back. Guillaume phased out of the equation, but Jonas and Fredrik returned. Jonas, however, insisted on not going down the goth road again. When we tried to straighten out what we were gonna do while talking influences, we realized both of us had discovered a band called Slowdive that we'd been listening a lot to for the past couple of months individually. Jonas was also very influenced by a new Swedish upcoming band called Kent and the American singer-songwriters Red House Painters, both which I hadn't started to appreciate yet. But Slowdive was a band that represented a genre called shoegaze, which mutually appealed to us both greatly. It was a style of extremely reverberated and atmospheric guitars with lush, sweeping vocals on top. We decided to do something that had never been done before and create a death metal version of shoegaze, which declared the birth of the Brave Murder Day formula. These days, there are numerous of post-rock and drone whatever instrumental bands with this kind of crossover sound, and some claim it was even invented by one of these acts. I rather feel we utilized it already back in 1996, without ever getting any credit for it, but the album is still there as a relevant reference if someone has doubts.
Fueled up by how much we loved the material on Brave Murder Day, we started writing new music pretty much right after the tour. Some of the new ideas we had sounded a lot like Paradise Lost Gothic, so we decided to expand on that, doing a lot of lead guitar melodies with that special sound, certain notes, musical weeping. Sunlight Studio was booked for a mini-album, Sounds of Decay. Michael had agreed to sing for us once more, and we looked forward to the result. Unfortunately, we decided to party hard before the recording. All of us were involved, me, Fredrik, Anders and Mike. I think that the party was at Anders' place. The day after I went late to the studio with a hangover from hell. I couldn't stand up straight. Fredrik showed up. I think he had been sleeping outside somewhere, but Anders was nowhere to be found. We called him a number of times but got no reply. This was our first visit to Sunlight, so it felt a little embarrassing to say the least. Eventually Fredrik and I had to take the subway to Anders' place and drag him out of bed. Lost some hours of precious recording time there. Back in the studio I was supposed to play drums. Did not go well. Guitars did not go well. Only the vocals sounded good. We didn't care until when the whole thing was mastered and sent to Avant-Garde Music. Then we realized how horrible it sounded and told label boss Roberto that we needed to re-record the whole thing. He got upset, of course, but had enough faith in our artistic decisions, so he let us book another session at Sunlight. No booze this time, and the mini album came out really good. One song from the original session, Untrue, was released on the Brave Yesterday's Best Of album. Anders was on some kind of creative peak, so he kept writing material while we were waiting for Sounds of Decay to be released. The new songs had a lot of the Brave formula still, but they were more accessible. I also wanted to go back to do vocals, so we decided we should try to do a whole album with clean vocals only. With this in mind, we got even busier with the new music. This time we were thinking a lot about the arrangements. I had also been thinking of giving up the drums. I was just playing drums in the studio, and as we hadn't had a rehearsal place for years, I never got any better. I agreed to play the drums on the new album, Discouraged Ones, and we booked Sunlight Studio again. We really wanted to be a full band, so we invited the bass player from the Brave tour, Mikael Oretoft, to join us in the studio for this album. The recording went really smooth. I enjoyed doing the clean vocals despite being quite nervous. It was a big step even though I had fooled around with clean vocals before. Mike from Opeth joined us in the studio and helped out with vocal lines and pep talk. After the mix we felt we had something huge going. This was going to be the make or break album. But no, we kept being Katatonia.
At this time I lived on my own in my first shabby small apartment in Skärmabring, Stockholm. I never felt at home there, and it was a very lonely and uneventful time. No cable TV, no internet, no money, and always a close to empty fridge at home. We never rehearsed, didn't even have a rehearsal room, and there was no live activity at all, except for one single gig in Västerås, which is the only entire gig Åkerfeldt actually fronted as a singer. We were headlining the gig out of 5 bands and probably had a nice backstage, but we never bothered to have a look. I don't know what was so terribly bad, but I think we felt uncomfortable for some reason. We decided to sit crammed together in our car out in the parking lot the entire evening. Imagine 5 empty faces staring out for hours from behind condensed windows, not even drinking. That was us. From what I remember, the gig went well. At least Mike met his future wife there. A little Yamaha 4-tracker, a guitar and some pedals were the tools I occupied myself with day and night. And despite being so miserable, my creativity was peaking at the opposite end. Both the material for Sounds of Decay and the full Discouraged Ones album was written during this time pretty much back to back. Especially with the latter, I started to put a lot more emphasis on arrangements and musical build-ups of the songs. I wanted to compress the style of Brave the Day into more of a rock standard song format, and I think we succeeded. It was as simplistic as it could be, but it didn't lack the hooks nor the melody. I remember we were looking for a drummer and put up ads in the music store saying one of your feet should be on the bass drum and the other on the hi-hat, to mark and emphasize our rock approach. But we didn't find anyone that would seem to have the personality we were after. The most common problem in the band since the start. So we decided that Jonas would do one last album of drumming, and then he would switch to lead vocals from here on. I also sang a lot of the backing harmony vocals on the recording of this album. In the chorus of the song I Break, it's actually me on lead vocals and Mikael Åkerfeldt on the harmonies. Fred Estby, the drummer of Dismember, who engineered the recording at Sunlight, said we sounded like the Cranberries. I drew a new logo, much more distressed looking than the previous one, and as the double bass drums had disappeared, so did the pentagram.
Being Katatonia means nothing is ever gonna happen. The album title says it all. Discouraged Ones was released and got mixed response. We thought the album was great and we were eager to promote it, but nothing happened. I don't think we even did one single gig to support the album. No tours, no gigs. I'm not sure why, but probably a mix between the usual Katatonia manner and the fact that the label had a hard time selling the album. We were an underground band that all of a sudden tried to step up the ladder and do something that Paradise Lost and Tiamat had done before. Our problem was that we were still very underground, whereas they had been doing their thing for years and had a huge following already when they started to alter their sound. But we got the album of the month in Terrorizer, which felt like a relief. Oh well, I remember that we had one gig scheduled in Norway. As I didn't want to play drums anymore, I had talked to Anders Nordin, a drummer who had just left Opeth. He agreed on doing this one gig with us and we rehearsed with him. Then 1 or 2 days before we were leaving for Norway, he called me up saying he couldn't do the gig. It was something with his work. Discouraged Ones? Kid me not. The one good thing that came out of this album was that we got letters and phone calls from bigger record labels. Especially Earache and Peaceful were very interested in what we were doing. After some talk with both of them, Anders and I flew over to England to have a meeting with Peaceful. They had been releasing some of our all-time favorite albums through the years, so it felt like a dream coming true. Hammy and Lisa Peaceful were great people, so we signed with them, and this was the goal we needed. New label, new opportunities, and a good reason to start writing music again, instead of sitting around being discouraged. We started writing songs, and were on the lookout for a new drummer. Tried a few people, they were good drummers, but we didn't click, I guess.
I remember by now we actually had found a new rehearsal space again, situated below the busy street Hornsgatan, Stockholm, where we practiced all the new songs for the upcoming live activities. But the whole year went by without one single gig. We also heard the neighbors above the rehearsal place had complained about what was going down in the cellar, so the owner tore it apart and we were on the street again. The album title did more justice as a representation of our lives than we could have ever thought it could. I think we spent most of our time this year listening to the accusations of our drastic change of sound. The only topic seemed to be defending our belief as the army of the narrow-minded marched all over us. We could see the Katatonia fans splitting up into two camps. We tried to lump them back together as one again, telling them to give the album a chance to grow, but it was a hopeless cause. Many of our fans turned their backs on us with this album, but we stood our ground. There were never any doubts from us. Once discouraged, we were now the discouraged ones, and this was our sound to be. Then something happened. In the middle of the throwing tomatoes, my fax machine started spitting out new offers from the big record labels. Most of these labels had turned us down at previous different points, but now all of a sudden showed immense interest, and it all ended with a bid war between Earache and Peaceful, both giants in the metal history. Our time on avant-garde music was up, and the label manager Roberto Mamarella, who had been a very important friend and a supporter of the band since the beginning, knew it was time for Katatonia to take a big step up the ladder. So we were released from this sweet Italian underground label with a blessing. I think Discouraged Ones was a very mature album for its time, and it showed the potential we had in us as musicians and how it would pave the way for the entire future of the band. Our whole identity was re-established and set a solid ground for the trademark of the band. The world was already familiar with his lyrical talent, but was yet to embrace his voice singing the words.
So when it was time to record the new album, Tonight's Decision, our first for Peaceful, we still had no drummer. I tried to play some of the new songs, but I hadn't really touched the drums since I recorded Discouraged once. Thomas Skogsberg, the Sunlight Guru, called some guy who was supposed to be a great drummer, and he was. The next morning when we came down to the studio, this guy was behind the drums warming up. His playing sounded great, but when it was time to hit the record button, everything changed. He was struggling with one song for a whole day and didn't manage to nail it. We started to get discouraged again, but all of a sudden we thought of our old friend Dan Swanner. Wasn't he also a great drummer? Yes, he was. I called him up and he said, "I will be on the first train to Stockholm tomorrow morning, and I will take the last train home tomorrow evening." I said, "I'm very happy that you're willing to help us, but we have 13 songs that you have never heard before. I don't think you can nail it in one day." He said it was no problem. So he came down, played 13 songs to nothing but a click track. He had scribbled some notes about what kinds of rhythms the songs had, as we had showed him on the demos. He put the note on the hi-hat stand, and then we yelled in the talkback microphone every time it was time for a new beat. He went back home with the evening train, and we had drums on the album. The rest of the recording was really smooth. The material we had was once again our best so far. Mike came down to the studio again when it was time for vocals, and we had a great time together. Peaceful were happy with the album and they hooked us up with the management. Things seemed to be going our way finally. We got a phone call from Peaceful saying they were putting us on tour with Paradise Lost, the Scandinavian leg of their host tour. Great news, but we had no band. We just had 2 guitar players and 1 vocalist. The tour was going to kick off soon. Stressful discouragement appears, but Freddy comes up with an idea. His brother Matthias, who is also a guitar player, can play the bass, and Matthias is playing with a good drummer in another band, Daniel Liljeqvist. We had no other choice than to trust Fredrik's judgment. We traveled to Avesta and hooked up with Matthias and Daniel. We knew Matthias from before, but we had never met Daniel. He had, despite the very short notice, managed to learn all of the songs on the list that we had sent him. I was so impressed with his drumming. We all were. Matthias was a good bass player too. We were ready to tour again, and we are assured that this is our time. We are going to match Paradise Lost. We rented some gear on a van, got a sound guy flown in from the UK and embarked on the tour, first stop Denmark. We were there a day prior to the gig, so we all had to sleep in the van, not comfortable. The next day we have aching backs and limbs. We are hungry and thirsty as we come to the venue where we park beside Paradise Lost's nightliner. We can see through the window that they are chilling in the couches, playing PlayStation. Reality versus Dream 1-0. The tour is a good wake-up call for us. We realize that if we want to step up to PL's level, we can't just sit around and whine that nothing ever happens. Daniel and Matthias become permanent members of the band, and finally, we can feel that we're going somewhere, slow but steady.
I had moved away from Skärmarbrink and back to the Red Line in Hägersten. Rewarded myself with a digital 8-tracker that had lots of effects and a drum machine. Creativity still running high and very fueled by the new deal with Peaceful, I wrote and made demos of all songs for Tonight's Decision in a relatively short period of time. Some new influences had also made an impact. Jeff Buckley, by whom we even recorded a cover song, Ben Christophers, Tori Amos, some others. We had a brief stint with a management from the UK that I think Cradle of Filth had, or was working with. Now looking back, I guess we didn't really need them, but signing with a big label like Peaceful, we thought it was mandatory to have a manager and an agent on board. Which in a way is true. The more popular you get while trying to stagger onwards without them, you'll sooner or later crash and burn, or you'll simply go nowhere at all. But what if that's just the problem? Already having a management and still not going anywhere. That will cost you more than you can afford. Happy to get a support slot on Paradise Lost Scandinavian dates, but otherwise very fed up with the low activity and not getting pushed on any level. I couldn't stand to read the statements of our only income in advances and merch royalties going into someone else's pocket for a hefty cut before reaching the band. I decided to end our collaboration. The first sign of me taking on some kind of loose manager role for the band was born right there. I had seen this artist doing these incredible Photoshop designs. His name was Travis Smith, and I tracked him down and expressed it would be an honor to work with him. He replied basically the same to me, and this marked the beginning of a collaboration that will last all the way up till today. The artwork for tonight's decision has been voted by many times as his best work.
I first met Fredrik and Matthias back in 1997 or 98. Matthias and the bass player of Hardcore act Subdive had seen me play drums with my band Wicked, as we were support for Luke, a Swedish version of Limp Bizkit, sort of. Subdive, where Fredrik also played guitar, lost their drummer Kenneth Engdahl. Does that name ring a bell? And needed a new one. After a phone call and one listen to their EP, I accepted their offer and joined them. I had never heard a song from nor heard of the band Katatonia before Fredrik asked me to play drums for them on their Scandinavian tour, opening for Paradise Lost in 1999. He gave me a cassette with a bunch of songs from Discouraged Ones and the brand new Tonight's Decision. Actually, I think it was one album on each side of the tape, and nobody had told me what songs to learn, so I listened to that tape every day in my mail delivery car for about a week, learning all the songs by heart. First rehearsal was also the first time I met Jonas and Anders. They seemed a bit shy, but nice guys. Katatonia didn't have a rehearsal place, so we borrowed Subdives. We didn't jam or anything, just straight to the first song, For My Demons. And it sounded crisp and tight from the first try. Playing the rest of the songs was easy, and I really enjoyed playing with real musicians. And on the tour I realized I never had so much fun, neither on nor off stage.
Happy to finally have a full lineup that seems to be working. We, or rather Anders, start to write songs for the next album. Not much touring back in the day. It's such a relief to be able to write songs that would not be limited to what the drummer could or could not play. And with Daniel in the band, we're content that we can do a little bit more complex riffs and rhythms, fuller arrangements, and overall better songs. Sunlight Studio is once again booked, and we finish up the demos for Last Fair Deal Gone Down. Unfortunately, we haven't had a rehearsal place in Stockholm since the last one a couple of years ago, so Daniel has to come down and play the songs for the first time already in the studio. Daniel is as poor as us. He comes to Stockholm with no money, not even cash to buy drumsticks. I have to check my basement and find drumsticks that I bought in 1991, some weird Tama edition called Triangle Grip or something like that. They are already worn out, but he manages to record a whole album with that pair of sticks. Quality indeed. It feels great to have the drums on tape. Yes, tape. Daniel goes back to his native Ludvika. Both Anders and I work at the post office during the day, and then we take our bikes down to the studio at night to continue working. It's totally exhausting, but we have so much faith in this album. It's what makes us go forward. The post office work we do to be able to pay the few bills that we have. The rest is all Katatonia. Fredrik and Matthias come down to put down their parts. Both guitars and bass sounds great. Anders and I continue to work at night, but sometimes when we arrive at the studio in the evening, there are other bands there. We then have to bike back home, sit around and do nothing until they give us a call from Sunlight saying the other band is done for the day. We ride back to the studio in the middle of the night, manage to work a couple of hours, and then have to head home for a couple of hours sleep. Back to the post office in the morning, back to the studio in the evening, work all night, repeat. When the album finally is done, it feels like all work really paid off. It's definitely our strongest album to date. The sound is powerful yet dynamic, and the songwriting has improved a lot. I can't remember if we slept for 2 weeks straight when we were done, because we should have. And when I think back on this period, I really can't understand how we actually made it. In the middle of the recording, we also go on a tour to Poland together with Opeth. We take a ferry to Gdansk, And when we arrive there, we find out that both bands are going to travel by train to the different gigs. Back then we didn't bring much gear to our gigs, but it's more than enough to bring a personal bag, guitars, basses, cymbals and snares when you have to carry it around at all times. The Polish people also have different traditions when it came to entering and exiting trains through windows. So we Swedes were kind of left behind, came in last and had to stand through all of the journeys. At one point, we were 3 people standing in the train toilet. It was the only room left on the train. Despite this, it was great fun. We didn't draw a lot of people to our own gigs with Opeth, but we played the Metal Mania festival in Katowice, and it was our first ice hall. Experiencing rock stardom for 20 minutes or so, totally worth it. On the ferry home we didn't even get cabins, so we had to sleep on various floors. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, freezing my ass off. Martin Mendes from Opeth slept beside me, and apparently he was cold too, as he had taken a huge palm plant to use as a blanket. Still, we didn't get much touring done. Touring is expensive, but at the same time it's pretty much the only way to get your band bigger, so we were kind of stuck in a vicious circle. At least we managed to go to the USA for the first time. We played the Milwaukee Metal Fest and it was a horrible gig. I will not bore you with details why, but let me say that the audience and the response that we got made up for everything. I was feeling really depressed that we couldn't deliver. We had such a great crowd, but in the end it was well worth it. To be able to see the people that had been waiting for us so many years, to see that they were there, and later on, I think we have redeemed ourselves. USA is now one of my favorite places to tour.
We played 3 shows in Poland and 1 in USA, all of them together with Opeth. The Polish shows were a complete mess. We traveled by train between shows and the promoter hadn't booked any seats, so we had to stand the entire time, or sometimes occupy the toilet just to have somewhere to stand at all. Don't think the shows were that good either. The show in USA Milwaukee Metal Fest was no better. Borrowed instruments and no stage sound at all. Most hardcore fans would know this show as our worst show ever. Main focus this year was to record Last Fair Deal Gone Down, and it would, again, take place in the Sunlight studio. If I remember it right, I think we took a break from recording to do the Poland tour, and when we came back to the studio, some other band had taken our studio time and we couldn't continue straight away. The drum parts were done before we left though, but it had taken about 2 weeks to finish. It was the first time ever I played with a click track, and I don't think I knew the arrangements of the songs very well neither. When we were rehearsing for the Poland tour, Anders played the main riff of what was to be the song Tear Gas, and that's about what I heard prior to entering the studio. Once there, I listened to the demos and tried to remember the arrangements before nailing it on tape. And with the equipment used in Sunlight at that time, there wasn't much room for mistakes. One fuck up and you had to do the whole song from the beginning. And there were a lot of fuck ups. The end result is fantastic, even though I only used one pair of drumstick on the whole album.
I only had one intention, to write Katatonia's masterpiece, and started to experiment a lot with different tunings on the guitars, then open up new roads. I started playing difficult 6-string chords, and the singer-songwriter influence of the likes of Buckley, Red House Painters was very vibrant. Also Tool and A Perfect Circle served as a big inspiration. I think this album has some of the most musical moments we ever done. Daniel's drumming was a big step up performance-wise. Jonas delivered his vocals with a lot more confidence. My songwriting was at its peak, and the production was and still is some of the heaviest, most warm and real sounding I ever heard. The recording was a very unforgiving experience, as the tape recorder wouldn't allow punch-ins, meaning you would have to wait till a break would come up for a halt. Or if the song didn't have any, you would have to play and record the entire song in one take. One small tiny mistake and you would have to go back and redo it all over and over again. I think we grew a lot as musicians by recording that album. It was as real as it gets. Peaceful put a sticker on it saying it was the best album in the history of the label, and then you have to remember they also released Paradise Lost Gothic. We had a small Polish tour with Opeth, and the billing was a co-headline joint venture, and we were gonna switch headline positions every second gig. But we felt the hype around Opeth was stronger, so we humbly let them headline all the dates. We never competed or anything, but we had such a similar career and lived the same way, so we were constantly comparing, advising and assisting each other. But this is where they passed us by, and rightfully was to move up many levels as a result of their immense touring. We should have followed their footsteps already back then, but they moved on to Music for Nations and we stayed with Peaceful. They were standing with a manager and an agent, while we were standing in a limbo.
Last Fair Deal Gone Down was released and the response from press and fans was immediately good this time. It felt like the hard work we put down on this album was going to pay off. We played Peaceville's festival tour Peacefest, 3 gigs if I recall correctly, in the UK, Belgium and Holland. The gig in Holland was one of the worst gigs we ever did, due to too much alcohol before going on stage. It haunts me to this day. I think we played Tear Gas for the first time, and I don't want to know what it sounded like. We had a good time with our label mates Dine, Sound Disciples and Beyond Dawn though. We also got to tour the UK with our label mates Peaceful Akerkokke supporting us. It felt good to play more new songs, and they were going down well with the audience. I remember that we had a totally packed gig at the London venue The Underworld, which was a highlight. All in all, a fun tour, and even if the music on the bill was a weird match, we had a lot of fun with the English gentlemen. The next thing was going to Turkey for the first time. It was a highlight of our live career so far. The gear and sound was kind of shitty, but the love from the Turkish crowd overshadowed everything. We played 2 gigs 2 days in a row at the same venue, and also had time off to go on strolls through beautiful Istanbul. Turkey has become one of our favorite places to play, and we always look forward to going back. And finally we get the chance to do a full European tour in support of an album, for the first time since Brave Murder Day. We join Opeth on their tour for Blackwater Park, and once again it feels like the ball is rolling. My memories from this tour is a haze, because we partied a lot. We had good crowds and a great time with our longtime friends in Opeth.
Peaceville arranged a 3-day tour in March, Peacefest. All the bands on the label were to perform with My Dying Bride as headline act. Last Fair Deal Gone Down hadn't been released yet, but I think we played Tear Gas along with some songs from Tonight's Decision and Discouraged Ones. Apparently the shows were recorded for a Peacefest live CD or whatever, and when we heard our live set we quickly destroyed the tape. Heavy drinking before doing a show does wonders for your self-confidence, but you can't fool a sober ear from telling hit from shit. From then on we decided to not drink before the show, a rule that has been modified several times to fit the mood. Did a show in Finland in June, and for the first but not last time we traveled on the big ferry that runs between Sweden and Finland. Back in the day we used to have a ritual when doing this trip, which involved buying 2 cases of beer and drinking them in the cabins before heading up to Röda, the Red. It's the place where it all happens. Dancing, karaoke and shit-faced Finns and Swedes, us included. The show in Sättemö, Turku, is one of the first shows that can be viewed on YouTube. Looking at it now, we weren't a very exciting band to watch back then. I guess we weren't for a couple of years. We were 5 guys and a backdrop doing a punky gig, and that was it. But we never bothered doing anything about it really. We also went to Turkey for the first time. Played 2 shows for 2 days in a row at the same venue. Ate Turkish kebabs, got drunk, ate ice cream in the street, shit our pants, well, some of us, and got back home with bad shits for a month. Good times. In late June, we headed out for a short tour in the UK together with Akerkoki and Gandalf. I remember Jonas Kjellgren, guitar player of Scar Symmetry, was doing front of house for us. This was one of those decadent tours. There were people in the bus that weren't in any of the bands. One punk guy who hammered large nails into his nose, a big black girl in the front lounge spanking all of the boys, even if, or because, you didn't want to. Went back to Finland and did our first open air festival, Tuska, together with In Flames among other acts. But the highlight this year was the European tour as support for Opeth. We had to cancel the first couple of shows, hence to drummer Martin Lopez' collapsed lung. I specifically recall waking up in the bus one morning, and it was all quiet. The only ones in the bus were Mikael Åkerfeldt and I, so we decided to go get some food, and we found a dirty Chinese restaurant. Mike told me about his visions of the next Opeth album. He wanted to do one white and one black album, one soft and one heavy. I was young back then, and I didn't have a clue what Opeth and their music was all about. I think I told him he was crazy. Doing that tour made us tighter both as a live act and friends, and I really didn't want to go home. But playing songs from just 3 albums wouldn't work for long, I knew that. I wanted to record a new album.
We had done very few gigs in the past, and we weren't used to touring to support any of our albums. We had been talking with Opeth about doing our dream tour with us 2 on the bill. Not only would it be 2 great bands, but it would also be the best of friends traveling together in a bus to roam Europe. It was a good tour, but I remember I had to make a lot of angry phone calls to their agent, which today happens to be our agent, as none of their tour posters had our logo or even name on them. It just said, plus support, and we were promised a special guest slot, including our logo. We had nobody speaking on our behalf. I remember once we got to the UK on that tour that Mike and Peter from Opeth were gonna go away for an evening for business dinner. It proved to be with Andy Farrow of Northern Music, who today happens to be our manager as well. Someone indeed works in mysterious ways.
This year it's quiet on the live front, fueled by the, in our eyes, success. Last fair deal gone down. We start thinking about the next album. Anders and I set up a home studio at his place. We get a MacBook and recording program, Cubase, plus some other gear. We decide that we should be working at least 8 hours a day, writing music. After a couple of days we can see a pattern. I started showing up at Anders' place by 10 or 11 in the morning. But we can't get started right away. There are things we have to watch on TV. Maybe there are movies we have to see before getting started. Sometimes we need to go out and have a few drinks first. But during the night, the music speaks. At night we get as creative as can be. The Viva Emptiness songs are nocturnally born one after one. So we keep working the night shift and everything sounds really promising. We send out CDs to the other guys with our ideas and we get together, rehearse a little I think, and book time in a fancy studio in Stockholm called 301. I think Europe's The Final Countdown was recorded there. I seriously can't remember why we chose that studio. I don't think we realized what we were doing. We decided that we should be engineering the whole album by ourselves. So we had a guy who came in and put the microphones at the right places on the drums. Then we started to record everything by ourselves. As Anders had learned Cubase and this studio was using another recording program called Logic, he had to relearn the whole process again. It took some time, but we managed to track all the drums. When it was time for guitars, we couldn't get a decent guitar sound. We simply didn't know how to work those things in the studio. We then decided to record all guitars through a digital preamp and the same thing with the bass. The studio time we had booked, I think it was 1 month, is soon going to end and we're still recording vocals. This means that we won't have time to mix the album. Sound-wise, everything is chaos. We see no other choice than to call Dan Swanner, who has closed his Unisound studio and is working in a music store. He recommends a studio in his hometown Örebro. It's called Studio Kuling. and the guy who's working there, Jens Boge, has just taken over the studio from the previous owner. Anders and I traveled to Örebro to hook up with Don and Jens and to have a meeting about the situation. Both of them are keen to take on the project of mixing the album, so we split some of the duties. Dan is going to get us a drum sound and a guitar sound, and then Jens will mix the whole thing. So everything gets started. I track the last remaining vocals in the small studio at Kuling, while Jens is starting to mix the album in the big studio. To hear the sound go from totally chaotic to audible is such a relief. In hindsight, the sound that we got is not really what we had in mind when we started writing the music for Viva Emptiness, but Jens did a very good job to save it and make it listenable. Lesson learned. Don't waste money on a big-ass expensive studio with a recording room where they usually record huge choirs if you're just gonna sit around, record guitars through a digital preamp straight into a computer.
The least busy year for us, show-wise. We did 2 shows in Sweden and went to Estonia. Main focus was to write a new album and record it. Anders and Jonas are the main writers, and with me living some 3 hours up north from Stockholm, where they live, I got a CD with all the songs they recorded in their home studio. We have never met up in the rehearsal room to jam out a new song or to try out new riffs. Come to think of it, we never rehearsed that much, even if we didn't record a new album. A very naive and unprofessional approach for a touring live band, but that was a long time ago. The recording of Viva Emptiness was done at 301 Studios in Stockholm and the mix at Fascination Street in Örebro. The plan was to at least finish 1 track per day for the drums, and this time I'd heard the songs before entering the studio, so my self-confidence was better. I stayed at Jonas's place, and I remember listening to Pathos every morning at breakfast before we took the subway to the studio. We decided to record and produce everything ourselves, and only had a guy setting up the mics for the drums. We soon found out that we've taken water over our heads. When doing pre-production of the songs, Anders and Jonas used Cubase or something similar, and in this studio they used Logic. Anders sits down with a huge sigh and starts relearning with the help of a thick manual for Logic. At least we managed to record the drums with, however, a very poor sound quality. The guitars were sounding shit too. Time was running out and we realized we couldn't finish vocals and mixing. Don Svaner stepped in and fixed the drums by resampling all of the drums except for cymbals and ghost notes, and sorted the guitar sound. Jens Bogren at Fascination Street, Kuling back then, did the mixing, saving the album and us from a disaster.
The writing process changed on this album. In the past I had done all the music by myself, and Jonas contributed with the lyrics from his end. But now we decided to collaborate together on the whole thing from scratch. The album was an answer to the predecessor. The open 6-string chords were gone. We tuned down the guitars and got more single-string riff-based again. I wouldn't say that the nu metal scene that was going strong at the time influenced us, but maybe it subconsciously rubbed off on us to go into this heavier and more aggressive direction. I remember I liked Mudvayne anyhow. We started to incorporate more loops and more keyboards in the background, and Katatonia sounded both aggressive and melancholic at once. We'd never been more contemporary.
This year meant 2 important releases for me, close to each other. Not only the new album, but also the birth of my first son. So in the middle of the overwhelming chaos that comes with becoming a parent, I'm also trying to do press for the album. It's kind of difficult, but it works out somehow. It's getting worse as we have to head out on a 7-week headline tour of Europe when my son is just 2 months old. When I get back home, he's completely different from when I left. He's got hair and is able to smile at me. I feel that I missed out on important things. The tour, however, is okay, I think. My memory isn't that clear. We had a number of support bands doing different legs of this long tour. It was great to have American band Daylight Dice opening for us, as it's the band of our longtime friend and webmaster Jesse Half. Playing Hungary for the first time is my strongest memory from this tour. Some 600 people going totally crazy at a mega pub. I still keep this gig in a special place in my heart. Last gig of the tour is in Stockholm. We have friends and family coming over, and it's such a relief to come home. Having so little tour experience, 7 weeks was a long time for us to be on the road. After the tour we went back to doing more normal things. I was occupied with being a father, and also Daniel and his girlfriend were expecting to become parents. During the end of the summer I was trying to get in touch with Anders, but I couldn't get a hold of him. Not an unusual situation, but after a while I started wondering what was up. We were scheduled to do an interview at Swedish National Radio, so I needed to set up a time with him. After finally getting hold of him, we had a talk and I realized he didn't want to continue with Katatonia. Anders had pretty much taken on the role as the band's manager. He's the only person in the band with a business mind. I guess this had been tough, and at the same time he was very disappointed with how Peaceful were taking care of us. We wanted to do videos to present our music, we wanted to do more tours, but we felt we were going nowhere still. I convinced Anders that we should do the interview at the radio, and that we should go out afterwards, have a few beer and talk about the whole situation. He was still determined to give up Katatonia, but we managed to talk it over. I don't remember exactly how, but he agreed on giving the band another chance. Today I'm happy that I actually stood up for something. I felt there was too much to lose. Usually I'm not the kind of person that pushes other people, trying to make them think in a positive way, etc. I guess it's kind of far from who I am, but for the sake of Katatonia I could do it.
Viva Emptiness was released in April, and the tour started the same month. Jonas became a father in January, and going on tour only 2 months after must have been rough for him. First leg of the tour was Finland, and again we took the ferry over. Can't remember much from this tour, but one thing will never leave my memory: the tour bus. It was an old, gold-colored piece of junk and held 10 seats, 5 beds. Well, it looked like beds but functioned more as coat hangers and shelves for beer and vodka. And it also had a busted exhaust pipe. When going back to Helsinki from Nivala, the temperature had dropped to -20 centigrade outside. And of course, the bus heating decided to throw in the towel. I'm not lying when I say it was at least -10 in the bus, so I put on all my spare clothes. Anders, Matthias and Fredrik took the backdrop as covers to the back of the bus and cuddled in one of the beds, whereas me and Jonas sat in the front very close together, hacking teeth and 100% certain we were going to freeze to death. I think we traveled for 3 hours before stopping at a service station that actually was open, because it was in the middle of the night, to buy the biggest cup of hot chocolate I could find. When I was starting to get my feet semi-warm, it was time to roll again, as we had to get to the ferry from Helsinki back to Stockholm. Another 2 hours in the world's biggest ice bucket on wheels, we finally arrived at the harbor and said goodbye to the bus forever. Back in Stockholm, Matthias and I stayed at Anders' place, waiting for the new nightliner to pick us up for the rest of the tour. We only packed guitars and cymbals, as we were getting a brand new drum set, amps and other gear at the venue of the first show. The bus was alright, at least in good health from the beginning, and better than the wreck we had in Finland, and it had beds for all of us. By the end of the tour, it would become an infectious residence, getting and keeping us ill for a long time. In Denmark, on a day off, some of the guys even had to see a doctor, while the rest of us went to Tivoli. Matthias and I rode the free-fall attraction, and again feared for our lives. All in all, the tour was okay, but very long, and even longer as I received a phone call from my girlfriend saying she was pregnant. Fredrik got the same news from his girlfriend just days after. Last show was in Stockholm. I was happy to finally be on home ground, seeing all my family and friends who came all the way to see the show. We didn't do anything after that tour before October, when we went to Greece for the first time to do 2 shows.
Viva Emptiness was a different album to follow up Last Fair Deal Gone Down, both musically and sound-wise. So many compromises went into that album, not in the writing, but in the making and the production. This is still the only album I would really feel would be liberating to remix or even re-record, because I still love the songs. Many of them could easily represent a position on our last album as the strong tracks they are. Our first headline tour with this album was a very rough one. We naively put the control of the band into the hands of people living up to the name of amateurs. The result was a last-minute booked tour with a stupid routing, poorly promoted and with a tour bus infested with some kind of virus that didn't allow us to get well for the total 7 weeks we spent in it. We were on painkillers and medicine on a daily basis. I have no good memories from this tour. For too many occasions I just wanted to go home and get cured and pick up the health I left behind. I also wasn't happy with Katatonia as far as a live act. Back then, if someone said one word about us not living up to expectations, or that we couldn't deliver live, I'd tell them to fuck off. But they were right all along. They were speaking the truth. Katatonia at this time was simply not a good live band. I probably played like shit, but wasn't happy with reading I was the only one attempting to put on a show and reviews, and just because I was the only member with long hair could certainly not have been the issue. The root of the problem wasn't the lack of attitude or the missing enthusiasm, or even, as to say, do you got what it takes? We argued about this a lot as I failed to see any improvement, and at one point I almost started to accept maybe that was what we were supposed to be like. Great on record, shit in concert. Was that even our trademark? I spent the rest of my energy fighting with the label about getting more priority and then pushing the album and us in more ways. I had to beg and nag about shooting a video and other publicity and promotional issues. I had to beg and nag about them submitting us for any tours. I finally begged and nagged them to kick us off the label in order to save the band from going under. By this time I had changed from being just the guitarist of the band to unwillingly become Katatonia's full-time manager, and it was all about the biz. There are certain things a member of a band shouldn't deal with. I'm talking about the uncomfortable things that don't go hand in hand with being an artist. The need to sometimes have to be that person people will think is an asshole. I was forced to become one for the sake of the band not getting run over. I ended up doing all management duties, dealing with everyone on the outside, making sure things clicked on the inside. I became the band's agent and negotiated and booked all shows, routed all trips and paid all flights. I landed every member's endorsement deals. I designed all the merch. I maintained all the websites together with our webmaster. I was devoured by the world of Katatonia we had created.
2004 was kind of a non-happening year for us. We didn't do any real tours, but we had gigs at least, trying to push and promote Viva Emptiness as much as possible. I don't remember that much of it. Maybe we started to collect small ideas for the next album, writing some music here and there.
2004 was one of the most fun years for touring. We did a Scandinavian tour together with the band Amaran, starting off in Finland. Yes, the same ferry to Finland, and this time we brought my long-time friend Sonny as merchandise salesman. We quickly found out that the guys in Amaran liked to party too, so the ferry ride was even more fun than the former ones. Arriving in Helsinki, we got picked up by the Finn promoter and the same fucking gold-colored bus we almost froze to death in the year before. This was February too, so it was even colder, but the heating was fixed. Finland is one of our favorite places to play, and they have really great venues for live shows. We finished the finish leg at Tavastia, Helsinki. So after the show and emptying 2 fridges of beer and vodka, Sonny, longtime friend and merch guy, yells to us, "Let's head back to the hotel and rob all the minibars in all of our rooms. I don't give a fuck how much it's going to cost, but I'll promise I'll pay for it all." Said and done. The following morning, when finding out each minibar we emptied was around 140 euros, he had no recollection of promising to pay the bill. The following shows were in Sweden and Norway, so we hired a minivan for each of the bands. Played in Stockholm again. Someone missed the cue for the front drop to slide open, but we start playing anyway. Someone else forgot to tune the guitar on tonight's music, but we played anyway, until Jonas screamed, "Stop playing!" in the mic to an audience with lifted eyebrows. Not our best performance, but still not the worst. The last show of that tour at Pipeline in Sundsvall was fun. Although we thought it was going to be the most boring show of the tour. The ticket pre-sales were low, and when Amaran played their set, we couldn't hear anyone from the audience at all, from where we were. It turned out to be one of the most fun shows we've ever done. Could have something to do with us drinking drill wine on stage, but the people that were there seemed to really enjoy the show, and I think we've got 4 out of 5 in the local paper. Italy and Transylvania Live is, or was, a very nice venue with tombstones on the walls of all the bands that ever played there. We had been there once before on the Euro Tour 2001, and the owner promised that next time we play, we would get our own stone on the wall. The show was perfect and almost sold out. Anders and Matthias never showed up in the dressing room afterwards, and I was told they were still on stage, pouring some green booze down the throats of people in the audience. However, I think most of that stuff was poured in their own throats, with the end result of shit-faced rock stars. Anders tripped and fell into the huge red velvet backdrop that was dividing the stage from the backstage, and tore it down, leaving a big pile with him somewhere in the middle of it. The owner was furious and told us to get the fuck out, and that we could forget about getting a tombstone. The following day at the airport, I had an extra piece of luggage, aka Blackie, to push around on the trolley. Of course we went back to Finland once more. It was midsummer time, the peak of Swedish traditional celebration. Read, heavy intake of alcoholic beverage. And why not start the festivities on the ferry already? And why not with Fernet Branca? Hey, let's go to the piano bar, dry hump each other in front of old-timers, and do a beer overhead, and ending it with a headbang, helicopter style, so the piano player gets all wet and calls for security. A disturbing and not so professional ferry behavior. I miss those times occasionally. One of the main reasons one becomes a musician is to someday get rich and famous. Anyone who speaks differently is a liar. The famous part is pretty easy, but the money thing is trickier, especially when you fly to do a show in Turkey and deal with Turkish promoters who run off before getting the band paid. You lose a bag of merchandise, fly to Greece, lose a double kick drum pedal at the airport, not getting to play nor getting paid, spend all your private savings and then fly home, only to find a post from the hotel manager in the Katatonia.com guest book that we forgot to pay for a couple of White Russians and pay TV. If we had a film crew with us on that trip, documenting every minute, we would definitely be famous now, at least on YouTube. Mr. Per Sodomizer Eriksson entered our lives as guitar tech on this year's last tour. He'd been a long-time friend of mine and was a local guitar hero back home. 5 shows in Denmark, Holland and Germany were on the agenda. We traveled by minivan, and with nobody owning a GPS at the time, we planned the trip using printed sheets of mapping. I was the main driver, and Anders, "Did you turn right at the last exit, Nyström?" sat next to me reading the map and guiding the way, with very mixed results. A smooth tour with very few mishaps, except for after the last show, where everyone got so wasted that one of our fans had to drive us in the van back to the hotel.
The whole year was marked by a big DIY, do-it-yourself approach. All our gigs and mini tours this year were booked and organized by ourselves, and we sacked our merch company and started printing the merch ourselves. Lots of drinking and partying. Things got quite chaotic at times, but we had fun. Lots of fun.
Very few gigs this year, mainly because we have started to write music again, but we played at a festival in Greece that I remember quite well. Not only because we played at noon in the hottest sun ever, Daniel could hardly touch his cymbals while performing, but also because Dio played, and it happened to be Ronnie James Dio's birthday. After our gig we started to drink heavily backstage along with the guys from Dismember. Anders and Daniel had a fight, I can't remember why though, but it was quite fun. Anyway, after some hours of drinking we realized that the backstage area has been rebuilt without us noticing it. And now it has got long tables, full of champagne glasses, belly dancers performing, a lot of people celebrating. We celebrate this by putting down our heads in a big barrel full of beer, ice and cold water. Then we headbang with our soaking wet hair. This is where the now infamous refreshment invention, ice banging, was born. But the guards at Dio's birthday party didn't like what we were doing, so we were told to either stop or leave the backstage area. By then we realized that there was free champagne for all, so we headed over there to refresh ourselves further by 1. Drinking champagne, and 2. By doing champagne overhead, which is a festive version of Anders' classic party favorite, beer overhead. It was a great party and something we will remember for sure. Afterwards we wanted to take pictures with Dio, but Daniel was the only one who dared to knock on Ronnie's dressing room door. Someone opened and asked Dio if he was up for a picture. I guess he was very tired, but he came out, talked a little to Daniel and had a picture with him. Seemed to be such a friendly person. I'm glad we could be at his party even though I never spoke to him. He was one of my biggest heroes when I started listening to music as a kid and remained one of my favorite singers from that era. Determined to make the album of our lives, we lock ourselves up again at Anders' place, rolling out all the ideas we have on the table, put them together, pull them apart again, start from scratch on other things, arrange, rearrange. This takes a number of months, but the great cold distance is about to unfold. We have booked the studio Fascination Street, ex-Cooling, where we're gonna record with Jens Bogren, who mixed Viva Emptiness, and David Castillo. David is also recording ideas with us at Anders' place. CDs are once again sent out to the other guys, and we discuss a few things, mainly drum related. Both Anders and I are extremely happy with the material we have collected for this album. When we hit the studio everybody's really focused, and Jens is doing hard work with the whip. He won't let a millisecond of sloppiness through. Back in the day I remember watching Anders do guitar takes. Once he fucked up on the guitar he would look up, but continue playing. If no one said anything, he would just keep on as if nothing happened. Sometimes I would say, "You played the wrong note like 2 minutes ago," and he would reply, "I know, but no one said anything, so I thought it would be okay." With Jens this would be impossible. David is a tiny bit kinder, but he's also pushing us for the best result possible. Smooth recording all in all, and the result is superb. The songs shine through and the sound is stellar. The Great Cold Distance proves to be our masterpiece so far.
Shoot it up! The song Love Missile F111 with Siggy Siggy Sputnik is, for us, very much associated with the Metal Mania tour, as the driver of our van had it running on repeat in the car stereo throughout the entire tour. I have vague memories of this one, but will never forget the last evening of the tour. We had finished our set earlier that afternoon and started to party right away. Some of us ended up in Napalm Death's dressing room having a beer and throwing oranges in the brick wall just for fun. Mr. Martin Curtis Powell of Cradle of Filth later invited us to his dressing room for a drink, and I guess we all went there. Everyone was having fun. sitting or standing chatting with each other, when all of a sudden Matthias picks up a green apple, throws it, and by accident hits Danny Filth right in the face. My guess is that Matthias, in his drunken mind, still was with Napalm Death smashing oranges. Anyway, all hell breaks loose and Danny flies over the table and wrestles Matthias to the floor, punching and kicking him. I was shocked. I think we all were, and first thought he was joking, but when security came and lifted Danny up, still kicking and screaming, I kind of understood what the hell just happened. Luckily, none of the kicks hit Matthias badly, but his watch broke and we headed back to our hotel room with Matthias constantly asking, "What did I do? Can you believe how rude that guy is?" So I told him about the apple, but he denied throwing anything at all. Sorry, Danny. I had started to receive some demo songs for the upcoming album, and I was blown away by the material and technicality of the arrangements. For me, it was such a huge leap from Viva Emptiness, and I basically thought I wouldn't be able to play those complex drum parts. Everything was so well written and cleverly arranged, and I didn't want to be the guy to stop the progress for not being able to deliver 100% justice to the song. I even talked to Jonas about stepping aside, so they could get a better drummer. But when he said he refused to record this album with another drummer, I immediately went to my rehearsal place to start practicing. The Great Cold Distance was recorded at Fascination Street Studios in Örebro, starting late spring, early summer. I walked from my home carrying a case of cymbals and a backpack to the train station to go to Örebro, where I would meet up with Anders, Jonas and David. They picked me up at the station in a small VW Golf, in which they had been traveling from Stockholm, containing loads of gear and 3 people. I managed to squeeze myself and my gear into the car, but it was so tight it was hard to breathe. If the police had seen us, they'd shoot us on the spot. I had gotten 10 days off from my work at the bookbinding company, so I had to at least nail 1 song per day, which I did. I returned to the studio a couple of weeks later to do some backup screams. Later that summer, we went to Greece and the Rock Wave Festival. Some great bands were also on that bill, such as Twisted Sister, Anthrax, Dio and Dismember. I even got to talk to Dio and have a picture taken together with him. We went to Russia for the first time. As we live in the same town, Sodomeister and I started the trip together early morning with a train to Arlanda Airport, where we would hook up with the other guys. We were both a bit scared about going to Russia, so we started drinking whiskey on the train, making us braver and a bit tipsy, to say the least. The trip to Russia was as I expected it to be. Drunk people everywhere, stinking venues, bad stage sound, death threats, men touching your private parts, smoked cheese, very long bus rides in the night with roads not being rebuilt since Second World War, and last but not least, a lost Russian sound engineer who were later found killed in a ditch. All in all, a great road trip.
The way we wrote Viva Emptiness worked really well, so when it was time to start working on a new album, we dived into more of the same. Having learned from the past mistakes and eager, maybe even desperate, to not let the recording be compromised, we spent our longest period of continuous time and blew the biggest budget we ever had on the making of The Great Cold Distance. The result was cold and perfect, almost clinical and sterile, in a good way. I heard the album was used as a reference in hi-fi stores.
Just after the release of the album, we were playing Swedish metal magazine Close-Up's own festival in Stockholm before heading out on our headline tour of Europe. We haven't played live for something like 11 months, and we're going to play a number of songs off the new album for the first time. It proves to be hard. Nerves combined with new material is a shitty combo. We agree on trying to forget the gig ASAP and see if we can do better on the tour instead. It works out. The Euro tour is kind of short, only 3 weeks or something like that. I don't remember much from it. I think it was pretty easy going on the party front for some reason, or maybe it wasn't, and that's why I can't remember. 2006 also brought us our first US tour, which was something we had been waiting for. We teamed up with Portuguese gentleman Moonspell and supported them for a little more than a month on the straight, long and wide roads in the land of milk and honey. Another wake-up call, as the venues and overall vibe is kind of different in the US from what it's like in Europe. Catering, I think they've never heard of. Backstage, if we were lucky, we got a murky room in a cellar. At one place we had set up our dressing room in a large basement full of junk. But they had a sofa and it was a place where we could put our bags at least. After sitting there for a while, we heard snoring from a pile of garbage. We did try to see who or what was actually sleeping, but never could tell, as we could only see a pile of garbage that was snoring. After a while we adapted to this, however, and were happy like kids when the local crew threw us a crate of beer and nothing else. Daniel developed a need for the drink Irish Car Bomb. After our gigs he would disappear to the bar of the venue, and by the time he came back he was a bomb. If you want to befriend this man, you know what to buy him, alright? This matter is still going strong. Anyway, we were used to the secure and healthy venues of Europe, so the first time on the tour felt kind of rough. But nowadays, as we know what to expect, we really love touring USA. The audiences are brilliant most of the time too.
The Great Cold Distance was released, and we started getting ready for the upcoming Euro tour. We had started to take the stage performance a bit more seriously now, and with a new red backdrop with the new font, side drops and even archy front skin for the kick drum, now we at least looked cool on stage. The warm-up show before the tour was the Close-Up Festival, which was so terribly performed I'm not even going to comment on it here. A few days later we head out for what would be the smoothest tours in the history of all tours. Great venues, great catering and fantastic crew. To talk about all the great things on this tour would be boring, so let's skip to the US tour, shall we? At this time I was in a bit of crisis with myself after some rough family matters making me slightly split personality. I was grumpy when I was sober and stupid when drunk. As main support for Moonspell, we would be on the road for a month and I didn't like it from day one. The crew sucked. We even had a merch guy stealing money from us, and when we found out, we threw him off the bus in the middle of the desert in Arizona. No worries though, he survived, unfortunately. The catering was terrible, and so were most of the venues. At one point, I felt so disgusted with the whole thing, I actually quit the band. Right there on the spot, saying, I do this tour and then I'm off. I joined the band again a couple of days later though. After a show in Fort Worth, Texas, we had a stupid hot sauce competition, and after tasting some, I decided to cool myself with vodka and juice. But we were out of juice. I found some Gatorade in the fridge and mixed a 50-50 drink, chugged half of it and filled it up again with only vodka. I have no idea what happened after that, but Jonas was nice enough to capture everything on a video camera. I was told afterwards that I wasn't very nice to some of the guys on the bus. Oh well. We ended this year doing a show in Finland on New Year's Eve, personally invited by Ville Valo of Him, and this time we traveled by air rather than by sea. Our girlfriends were also invited to this special night, which was more of a party than a show. I even proposed that night with a positive outcome, although we're not married yet.
We finally got an agent on board and started to work with the UK division of the world famous The Agency Group. This was a step in the right direction, as the interest in the band had doubled or even tripled. Also, the relationship with Peaceful had been repaired and improved. We were very happy with what they had done for us, and we felt we'd become finally the priority on the label, which showed in a great communication and lots of plans on the table. We changed our logo again, but it wasn't a deliberate decision like in the past. Travis Smith's cover artwork to The Great Cold Distance was really different and stripped, and our logo, in our eyes, ruined the impact of that duotone artwork. The sharp, classy font just fitted so much better visually. So we started switching between using the old logo and the new font depending on the use. We toured a lot to support this album, and most runs went really smoothly. There was definitely something in the air now. Things were rolling, and we had gotten a good grip on the road we traveled.
We kept touring, gigging, drinking to keep the momentum of the Great Cold Distance going. The album had received rave reviews and was our best-selling album so far. We had noticed that we played to bigger crowds, a more diverse audience, and we got more feedback from people all in all. Started planning to go on our own headline tour of the US, and we were going to bring along Countrymen Scar Symmetry, Finnish Friends and Swallow the Sun, and another band from the country of 1,000 lakes, Insomnium. This tour proved to be a smoother ride, probably because we knew what to expect. We had a great time with Scar Symmetry on the bus, especially guitarist Jonas Kjellgren, who is an old friend of the band. He's been doing live sound for us in the past, and he used to be in bands together with both Fredrik and Matthias. Before we know it, the tour is over, and we are left with nothing but memories, like the last gig where we played to something like 30 people, and we had Scar Symmetry vocalist Christian Elvestam singing Sweet Nurse with us. He actually works as a nurse. Great party afterwards, and when we wake up, everybody's hungover but very ready to board a plane bound for safe old Sweden and Finland. But wait, Katatonia is not going home. We have to go to Mexico first to play a couple of shows. Mexico has been one of the places where we have wanted to go ever since the beginning of the band. South and Latin America has been extremely supportive through our career, and we have never been close until now. Mexico City proves to give us one of the most intense and euphoric live experiences to this day. We couldn't bring the crew from the US tour, so we went there all by ourselves. We had a lot of trouble getting the sound to work, but it didn't matter. When it was time to hit the stage, the tension in the building was something you could cut with a knife, and the Mexicans were just as loud and crazy as we always heard beforehand. This was one of the biggest highlights for the band, period. The other gig is in Monterrey. It's also great, but not as intense as the one in Mexico City. All in all, a great end to a great tour. Another highlight of this year includes a gig on the Sweden Rock Ferry, a boat cruise between Sweden and Finland packed with metalheads. We're not scheduled to play until the ferry goes back from Finland to Sweden, so we have a free night before the gig. Bad idea. Alcohol is literally flooding these ferries, and in the company of metalheads plus bands playing, it can only go wrong for us. We were supposed to play at 1 in the afternoon the day after, and if it was a normal gig day, we would be sleeping by then. Now we have to get up kind of early, with a hangover from hell. I remember waking Matthias up 40 minutes before showtime with a bottle of Jägermeister. He takes a large sip, walks down with me to the stage, still very drunk, finds out he's got no picks with him, and starts by asking the Swedish stage manager in English, "Do you have a pick?" Another classic quote from Krypton right there. Unfortunately, guitar tech Sodomizer had also been drinking a lot the night before. He manages to tune the guitars totally wrong, which we don't notice until it's time for a chorus, where it literally becomes impossible to sing. This happens approximately 5 songs into the set. I look at Anders, he looks at Matthias, who just stands there with an empty stare, and says, "Let's quit right here. Tell Daniel and Fredrik that we're off, thank the audience and walk out." I feel this is not our worst gig ever, as it's not worth to be even called a gig. Strangely enough, people from the audience come up to me saying it was great. They must have been very drunk, or as hungover as us.
The Great Cold Distance was very positively received in Finland and got great reviews. It even made it to the national top 10 chart. So when we did the Tuska Festival again that year, we had the biggest crowd on that stage that night. The performance was flawless, and we wanted to celebrate the great success with a party. But of course, we ran out of beer, but our dear friend Sodomizer said he could buy some, as he was going to buy cigarettes anyway. And he comes back with 7 cases! What a hero! Doing the Roskilde Festival has always been a dream for me. But going there and actually seeing the mess and chaos was a nightmare. The festival site looked more like they'd set it up in a lake rather than on land. Tents were floating around, and we were walking around in knee-high mud. The show was boring, with very few people staying to see us. We decided to not even bother checking into the hotel and just get back home as soon as possible. Our first US tour as headliners was just about as smooth as the Euro tour. The crew was exceptional, and our support bands Scar Symmetry and Swallow the Sun were all pleasant and cool to hang with. I particularly enjoyed our party nights on the bus with Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer as a trigger song. When the tour was over, we said goodbye to the crew and support bands and went straight to Mexico for 2 shows. The Mexico City show was the highlight of our career so far, and we felt like true rock stars for the first time. Hundreds of people even went to our hotel, screaming and making noise. Matthias and I shared a room, and we couldn't figure out what was going on outside the hotel. I looked out the window, saw the crowd, and directly wanted to go down to them. Matthias joined, and with massive security we greeted them and autographed every piece of paper they had. We told the other guys about the experience the following morning. They had all heard the noise, but thought it was a riot and didn't dare to go outside. Back in Sweden again, and traveling on the Chaos Ferry. Again. But this time we're actually going to perform. Sweden Rock Festival has arranged a mini-festival at sea with a wide mix of bands. We are scheduled to play on day 2, going back from Finland to Sweden, so we have a day off on the ferry. Fredrik is struggling with fever and throat pains, so he's taking it easy in order to be able to do the gig. The rest of us are off watching bands and drinking beer. The usual boat behavior. It turns out Fredrik is feeling even worse the next day, but is able to do the show. We have to, however, cancel the Swiss date the following day, as Fredrik is forced to see a doctor to get treatment. First cancelled show in 8 years, and we get so much shit for it. People are posting pictures on our web forum, where they are flipping off the Katatonia dressing room sign and writing "We are pussies" for cancelling due to too much drinking on the ferry the day before, which was not the case. We are always drinking on tour, but we have yet to cancel a show for being hungover.
The support for the Great Cold Distance stretched into this year as well. More touring, and we heard the album had outsold all of our older titles. It had been a long time coming, but overnight sensations don't belong in our world. Katatonia had a steady following, in for the flavor of the music, not for the flavor of the day.
This year is also an easygoing year on the tour front, as we are supposed to start writing songs for the next album. One of the few gigs we do is a small festival in Italy called Dark Fest. Daniel and his girlfriend were expecting their second child at the time, so we couldn't bring him. We talked to Robin Berg, a friend of the band and ex-drummer for Amaran, asking him if he can do the gig instead of Daniel. He agrees to do it. We rehearsed a little with him, but most of the time he was practicing by himself at home on a digital drum kit. When we get to Italy, he is super nervous and is getting worse by the minute. We try to talk to him before the gig, but it's impossible. We try to give him beer and wine to cool down, but he refuses to drink 1 drop of alcohol before playing. He says that if the gig goes well, he will party like a maniac afterwards. We hit the stage and Robin is phenomenal. He had nothing to worry about. After the gig he starts to drink, so happy that the gig went well. I don't remember what happened, but he told me recently that no one partied with him afterwards. He said the rest of us got wasted on drugs and went back to the hotel. I don't know what to think about that. Maybe he's joking, but my memory is unclear as to this day. We were supposed to write music, yes, but nothing really happened. Daniel had become a father again. Also Fredrik and Matthias had 2 kids each. I was going to be a dad again in the fall, so we just tried to live our normal lives, I suppose. I was writing some music, but it never made it into real songs. Just a lot of scattered ideas lying around, waiting to get picked up by someone with more discipline than what I had at the time. Did a few more gigs, one in Spain, which was a festival held in a bullfighting arena. Nice to meet some old friends like the people from My Dying Bride, so we partied a lot. Matthias got so tired and wasted from this that he fell asleep immediately after sitting down in the bus that would bring us bands from the festival back to the hotel. He then starts to snore so loud that someone from Destruction, who had also played, shouts, "Shut up, Grandpa!" Gotta love it. The day after, we are back in Sweden only to board another ferry, the Mellow Boat, arranged by Stefan Demle, who also used to run cult record shop Mellotronen in Stockholm. We're playing with Opeth, Comus and Anecdoten among others. The gig is great despite high waves outside, which causes some trouble keeping the balance on stage. Sodomizer, the guitar tech, gets seasick, so he gives in after just a few songs. As an encore, we're going to play the song Murder, but with Mikael from Opeth on vocals, as he was singing it on the Bray Murder Day album. But with no guitar tech, trouble arises, and Fredrik's guitar is horribly out of tune during the song. Anticlimax, to say the least. We do a few more gigs, and then I have my second son in November, which called for some peace and quiet on band front once again. A couple of months after that, I speak to Anders about the music for the next album. He tells me he's got no ideas, and also that the management part of the band is consuming more and more of his time. I know about the situation, we all do, but neither me, Daniel, Matthias or Fredrik have a mind for business decisions, so we can't help him that much. After a bit of whining, I decide to try to make as much music as I can on my own, to see where it leads. I had been writing quite a bit of material on Great Cold Distance, but back then Anders and I were working together with all the ideas we had.
Me and my girlfriend were expecting our second child in late February. So doing a show in Italy the 24th would be risky, I knew that. But instead of cancelling, I asked Robin from Oktobertide and Amaran to fill my place this one time. He was more than happy to help out, so we arranged a couple of rehearsals where I sat beside him as a compass. It was a headline show and some 18 songs were on the set list, but he did a great job. They even performed the song Follower for the first time, without me. Bastards. The rest of the year consisted of only festivals. In Spain we performed in a bullfighting arena with Saxon as headline act. Jonas got to meet Biff and get an autograph, get hammered and fall into a building fence, and at the same time making sure it collapsed. We flew home early next morning to play another boat festival. Opeth was there too, so we decided to do the song Murder with Mike on guest vocals. It was very stormy when we were on stage. Mr. Per Vomitizer Eriksson, who was still guitar tech at the time, lasted about halfway into our set before running up to his cabin, puking his guts out before passing out. Hellfest in France is one of our favorite festivals to play. Very professionally arranged and loads of fantastic bands and friends to watch and hang out with. We had an early slot with the sun shining in our faces, but it didn't matter. The crowd was massive and loud, and that's what matters. An interesting incident occurred, the 6-hour limousine ride from Kuopio Rock, Finland, taking us back to the airport. The fact that we had a limo with a private driver taking us back, instead of a cigarette-smoking flounder face driving a shitty van, is interesting itself. I was sitting next to one hungover sodomizer who was trying to sleep and in the same time suppress vomit. He did a great job and lasted 5 hours and 55 minutes before filling 2 50-centiliter cups. And as we rolled into the airport, people outside of the limo were taking out their cameras and cell phones. Well, they probably thought we were real celebrities, but as Vomitizer got out of the car with 2 full cups of barf, trying to throw them into a dumpster only to pour 1/2 of a cup onto himself, the camera people went wandering about their own business again.
This year almost turned out to be a timeout. Sure, we had some gigs scattered over the 12 months, but we were really supposed to write a new album, and maybe even commence recording, which we never got started on. We all spent our time with our families, taking care of biz, and the time flew by.
In January I start to collect all material I have, music, lyrics and vocals. I sit by the computer 24/7, that's what it feels like at least. Making my noise when the family is awake, and then during the nights I try to arrange the songs, try to complete lyrical ideas, whisper vocal melodies. I send out ideas to the other guys, and they encourage me to continue. I get in touch with Anders Eriksson, Frank the Fault, who was doing keyboards for a couple of the the Great Cold Distance B-sides, Unfurl and Code Against the Code. He agrees to work with me on my ideas, adding keyboards, textures, loops, programming, etc. We booked David Castillo to record again and mix Night is the New Day. Studio session is set to start in July. During the spring I talked to Anders again, and he still hasn't contributed to the music for the new album. I have an idea. Me, Anders and Frank should get out in the countryside for a week to just write music and try to finish the pre-production of the album. In May we go to my parents' summer house, again, as we were there to write songs for our demo 18 years ago. We set up a studio and start working immediately. I realize Anders really missed making music, only he couldn't do it in his home anymore with all the distractions that he got lately. We write a couple of songs together and he also makes one song of his own. It's a very creative time as we are finally totally shut off from modern society. The house is in the middle of the forest with no neighbors for miles. Daniel comes over too so we can discuss drum parts. We do a bit of barbecuing every day, drink beer and rakia, Serbian booze that I get from a couple of Serbian friends. We go out with a small boat to do some fishing. At night we add the finishing touches to the pre-production and all of a sudden we have most music ready for the new album. Me, Daniel and David pack a car in July and head off to Varberg, a city on the west coast of Sweden where we are going to record the drums in a studio called Studio Mega. I'm really exhausted since I have been doing music pretty much every day since January, but I love drums so I don't have a problem with it. I think we spent 10 days at Studio Mega. Daniel heads home to Falun and me and David travel back to Stockholm where we are going to continue with guitars in his own studio Ghost World. We start tracking guitars after experimenting with loads of effect boxes. It's very time consuming. I have to play some guitar as well since I've written most of the material and it's faster than to teach Anders everything. Fredrik comes down to get his share of aching fingers too. Everything sounds great, we keep recording. Matthias comes down to play the bass and on one of the bass days I think I'm having my first day off since we started the recording. Then it's time to add all of Frank's stuff. Most of it we already have as MIDI files, but we also brought his Fender Rhodes piano to the studio. The album is really starting to sound good. Vocals next, and by now I'm starting to feel very exhausted since I've been around during all of the recording phases. The other guys have come and gone to do their things, but I just couldn't leave the studio. The songs are my babies and I have to make sure they are treated right. One night, David and I hook up with Christer Linder, who has recorded some guest vocals for the song Departure. Christer has been one of my favorite vocalists since the 90s, when he was the singer for a Swedish band called Dive. To have him featured on our album is such a big thing for me. We became friends after the release of The Great Cold Distance, and I didn't even have to ask him to be featured on the next album. He insisted. I finish up the vocal session, and I think we play a few gigs before the mixing. Again, it's just me and David present at the studio, and we work long hours. I go home just to get a few hours of sleep, then heading back to the studio. Deadlines are the enemy. I start getting weird nightmares, and one morning I wake up from kicking as hard as I can into the wall. Not in my best shape, I suppose. At least the mixing is finally done, and we send the album for mastering. I think I cooked some food for David to celebrate, but I'm not sure. Everything is in a haze thanks to the extreme stress. But the album came out great, and that's what matters. As we wait for the album to come out, we start to work with the management Northern Music Company. It's run by Andy Farrow, who is also the manager for Paradise Lost, Opeth and a number of other bands. This is very good news for Anders, as he can now step down from being the manager of the band and become the guitarist again. Northern Music hook us up with the Porcupine Tree tour. We will open for them as they do the Scandinavian run for their Incident album. We're all big fans of Porcupine Tree, and they have a large and diverse crowd, so it's a great opportunity for us. We play one song off the new album, Forsaker, and it seems to go down well with people. After that we do another support tour, this time with Paradise Lost around the UK. Still, the album is not released, and we are aching to play the new songs, but we have to wait just a little longer. It feels great to tour with our old heroes in Paradise Lost, however. We have a great time with them. We do a couple of solo shows after saying goodbye to PL, and then we head back home. We have more meetings with the management, and they want to send us out on more tours, especially since the album is coming out. It's serious business, so we have to ask ourselves how much we are ready to sacrifice for Katatonia. Me, Anders and Daniel want to give 100%. Fredrik and Matthias wants to do that too, but their life situations will not allow it. It is with heavy hearts we have to see them say goodbye to Katatonia. I totally understand their decision to leave. This lifestyle is definitely not optimal when you have a family and another job as well.
Cyprus is one of the most popular places to go on holiday if you're a normal working class Swede. We, on the other hand, go there when it's winter and cold to play a show and drive 1000 kilometers per hour with the promoter in his Porsche Cayenne, which was fun. The show was fun too, but the phone call from Jonas, almost suffocating from laughter, telling me our tour manager had shit his pants, was the funniest. Jonas and Anders were in full pre-production mode and had gone out to Jonas' parents' summer house together with Frank Default to complete all the songs for the upcoming studio session. I went down one weekend to listen and help arrange the drum parts, and even in this early stage of the songs I could tell it was going to be a masterpiece. In early June, Jonas, David and myself went to Studio Mega in Varberg to record drums. We worked extremely efficiently and finished in 9 days, giving us time to celebrate Midsummer at home with the family for the first time in 6 years. The rest of the recordings took place at Ghostword Studios in Stockholm, a place I never got to visit as it could only hold 3 people or the air would run out. We took a break from the studio to do a show in Portugal at the Vegas Open Air Festival. A well-needed break for Jonas and Anders, who worked in the studio every day in the middle of the summer. The album was finished and mastered late August, and we all had a listening session together with our closest friends in Stockholm. I was blown away the first time I heard 90's New Day. I couldn't believe how good it came out. All of us performed at our absolute max capability, and it shows in the songs. We were very eager to play these songs live, but when we tried them out in the rehearsal place, they sounded so weak and, well, just plain bad. It was impossible to recreate all the drum loops and layers of piano and synthesizers with our instruments. So we had 2 options: take in a 6th member to play keyboards or use backtracks. Another member would mean auditioning, but with tours coming up, we didn't have time for that. We decided to only use a click track on the new songs, and that we'd deal with programming backtracks after the upcoming 2 tours. We got an offer opening for Porcupine Tree 6 days in October, so we booked a warm-up gig in Eskilstuna. Raw Bar was the venue, a small place with a tiny stage. With Night is the New Day not being released yet, we were forced to play old songs again and only played Forsaker as it was pre-released on the internet as an album teaser. But only playing old songs, and with Forsaker feeling so poor and thin live without backtracks, and no one in the audience seemed to know it, I wasn't enjoying the show very much. It sure didn't feel like we just recorded the best album of our career. We headed for Germany to join Porcupine Tree. When we finally arrived at the venue, we loaded in our gear, waited for the guys to finish the soundcheck so that we could put our shit on stage. I got a brutal but fair yelling from their stage manager for not bringing a drum carpet. I figured that our chances to set up our backdrop were non-existent, so I used that for the rest of the tour as our new drum carpet. The show in Helsinki Ice Hall was my worst so far. In the middle of My Twin, 4 songs into the set, my right side kick drum beater split in half, and I didn't bring any spares. I think we went off stage after that. The situation felt hopeless and unprofessional. I felt hopeless and unprofessional. We've been doing this for 10 goddamn years, but we came across looking like fresh out of the rehearsal room doing our first show. Things changed a bit in the following shows, and it started to actually feel good playing. We finished 2009 with a tour supporting Paradise Lost on the UK leg of their Euro tour, and ending with a couple of our own club shows. The new album was released and got super good reviews. I couldn't wait to get back home and learn the rest of the new songs.
A pretty good year and a pretty bad year. We ran into problems with the authorities that stole all my energy. My motivation was already running low for music, but now reached sub-zero. I had to sit through meetings with lawyers and accountants for months. I could no longer focus on music, so Jonas took over my old seat at the grand table and was going on a roller coaster ride with the writing. Song after song and hundreds of parts were presented in a steady stream. Amazing. Fueled to find my way back to the creative phase, I teamed up with Jonas and our collaborator Frank the Fall out in the countryside for an intense pre-production and synthesis of the album writing. The following months were spent in the studio. Didn't see much of the summer, but you can't have it all. The next big step was making a change in the structure of the band, and after some meetings with long conversations, we finally teamed up with Andy Farrow of Northern Music, a known, well-respected management from the UK that had managed Opeth and Paradise Lost among others for many years. This move finally released me from the role as the band's manager, and consequently most duties which falls under it, a huge relief. I also left my flat in Hägersten, where I had lived for the past 11 years, to start over afresh in Gröndal with my pregnant girlfriend. Leave some of the old ghosts behind. At the very end of the year, we saw longtime members and brothers Fredrik and Matthias quit the band, leaving Katatonia as a three-piece. With a brand new album coming out and a European tour already booked, there was no time to audition new members. So we had to replace the brothers with session live musicians as a temporary but effective solution.
It's January again, and as we are supposed to start the touring cycle for Night is a New Day in the beginning of March, we need to find touring musicians fast. The new guitarist is easy to find. Per Sodomizer Eriksson has been the guitar tech for the band since many years, and he is also playing with Anders and me in the band Bloodbath. He agrees on taking the year off from anything else but touring with us. Bass player a little harder to find, but I was acquainted with Niklas Sandin, who was part in the last formation of Amaran before they split up, and I knew he was a great bass player, so I asked him. He also agreed, and we started the rehearsal. Everybody feels that the new guys bring fresh air into the band. Rehearsals are going great, so we all look forward to the European tour. Swallow the Sun from Finland are once again going to be our touring comrades, along with German post-rockers Long Distance Calling. This tour is the most successful one so far. Loads of shows are sold out, and we play to a lot more people than we ever did on a tour before. We definitely have a great time, and the new material is fantastic live. At least that's how we feel. Despite being a long tour, we don't want it to end. The love from the crowds have been overwhelming. I was planning to get married during the summer, but I had to change and rebook the date at least 4 times because of more and more festivals getting booked. At some of them we play with Bloodbath as well. Hectic, but sleep is for the dead, right? But I got married at last. Had a fantastic party. Sodomizer was performing with Michael from Opeth, and Martin Axelrod's girlfriend Natalie. Beautiful. Of course we needed to rest our livers from the festivals at least one weekend and have a wedding instead. I was then about to miss my flight to the honeymoon in Greece, as we performed in Poland the day before, and my first flight was delayed due to thunderstorms. All in all, a great summer. We also traveled to the US again to do a headline tour in the fall, and we didn't get rid of Swallow the Sun this time either. Also Israeli prog folk metallers Orphaned Land are joining the tour.
What was going to be our busiest year so far started off pretty sad, with Fredrik and Matthias leaving the band. We had 10 great years and thousands of beers together, but the show must go on. We had to find 2 great musicians to fill their places. Sodomizer got promoted from guitar tech to guitar player, and Jonas got in touch with Niklas, who had played bass in Amaran just before they split up. Getting ready for the upcoming Euro tour, we spent 5 weekends in our new rehearsal place, tweaking and perfecting the live set. Using in-ear monitors was new to us, but necessary in order to involve backtracks in our live performance. Finally, all the new songs sounded the way they should. With Swallow the Sun as main support and long distance calling, we hit the road, selling out show after show, staying up way past bedtime, drinking beer and having a good time with the best of people. It made me forget the bad stuff from last year. The new guys did a great job, and now with 4 hippies in front of the drum kit banging their heads to the music, it looked pretty cool. Almost like a heavy rock concert. On the bus, however, the focus was on who got the best Wi-Fi connection while we were still parked outside of the venue. Meanwhile, in the downstairs lounge, the Finns partied like there was no tomorrow. We said goodbye to them and long distance calling in Munich and moved on to Greece, where we had the best food ever. Sodomizer had a tiny heart attack after the dinner in Athens. Flew down to Israel, where we had the best after party at the coolest metal club ever. Further on to Russia, where we had the worst bad luck and timing ever and were forced to hire a taxi from St. Petersburg to Helsinki because a stupid ash cloud fucked up the airspace between Russia and Sweden. Summer means summer festivals, and we did a bunch this year. 3 of them were together with Bloodbath, which was a lot of fun. But most memorable was Rockin' Park, where me and Sodomizer watched Muse perform before we did our show. And the table tennis tournament backstage, where I tripped and dislocated my shoulder. I couldn't move my arm for a week. And when I finally was able to, it hurt really badly. I did the rest of the festival shows with the help of very strong painkillers. As I said before, the show must go on. Swallow the Sun joined us as support on the US tour too. Another dream tour with very few bumps, apart from 2 stolen guitars and sacked guitar tech though, including a magic night in New York. It was sold out and Christer Linder had agreed to do the song Departed with us as the last song of our set. We rehearsed it once during soundcheck, but when we played it later that night, I had goosebumps and a speeding pulse to the degree of having difficulty staying on the beats to the click track. Nothing comes close to the feeling I had walking off the stage that night. Many great shows and about 1 million Subway sandwiches later, we fly home to do a short Scandinavian tour, visit Portugal again and travel all the way to New Zealand and Australia. Doing the No Sleep Till tour was also one of the highlights of our career. With a short playing time and many days off, it was more of a vacation than a tour. You'd think we would go do cool things like swim with sharks or kangaroo boxing with our free time. But in this band, we enjoy wandering the streets close to our hotel, looking for music shops and nice restaurants. That is, if we're not sleeping in our hotel rooms like 12 hours a day, of course. On the last day of the tour, it's raining non-stop for 13 hours, with the exception of the 40 minutes we're on stage, actually. But Sodomizer is extra happy this day, as he's getting eaten by a monster in the Gwar show. We managed to leave Australia just in time before the flooding escapades. The grand finale of this year's touring will be to pay India a visit. Now, a yearly university festival arranged in Mumbai, with students from all around Asia, doesn't sound like the #1 place in the world a band from Sweden would get booked to do a show, but it later turned out to be. Some 8,000 kids turn up at the show, singing along with the songs and headbanging till the end. It's truly mind-blowing to experience people on the other side of the world knowing the lyrics to your songs. Thank you, India. Being in the country for less than 24 hours, we fly the long way home just in time to get to celebrate Christmas. We had done 98 shows in 10 months.
Walking in the same footsteps as the other guys before me, I was the last one out to have a kid, and my first son was born at the beginning of the year. I had 1 month at home to take care of my family before the European tour started. A great tour, To best describe it would be to compare it to the Viva Emptiness tour back in 2003, because everything that tour wasn't, this one was. When things unfold this way, much of the constant struggle and past miseries are what makes you appreciate the good times, and also understand where the borderline goes in between them. We felt it, and people told us that Katatonia had never ever been stronger than we were right now. And it's with full confidence I can say that during this time we finally progressed to become a pretty damn cool live band as well. All of us in Katatonia would like to propose a toast to close and absent friends, our dear partners and associates in the business wheel, plus you, our fans, for being there for us and there with us throughout all these 20 years. And why not propose a toast for the next 20 while we're at it? Cheers.
So when did